Hey guys, welcome to another movie review. Today I'm talking about a film that actually not a lot of people know about, and it's actually a sequel and a reboot to two movies that came out a long time ago. And those movies were Fletch and Fletch Lives. And this new movie is called Confess Fletch. And like I said, this is a reboot of the franchise while also kind of being a third entry slash continuation of the franchise as well. And instead of Chevy Chase playing Irwin Fletcher this time, we have Jon Hamm from The Town and Richard Jewell and Bridesmaids. Um, he's basically portraying Irwin Fletcher this time around. And in this movie, you guys, basically, Irwin Fletcher is on vacation. He supposedly is retired from investigative journalism, and he meets a woman that he falls in love with, and they become boyfriend and girlfriend. And basically there's this situation that this girlfriend has where um, her father will not be in trouble anymore unless they hand over some kind of painting that the father owns. So basically, Irwin Fletcher goes back to the U.S., hears about a paint trader slash paint collector that might have one of these paintings that this person wants while the dad is basically being held hostage pretty much. And basically they make a deal with him. He finds kind of like this Airbnb slash rental home that the girlfriend has connections to, and works out a deal to get one of these paintings so that way her father can be safe again. And over the course of this, basically, Irwin Fletcher gets framed for murder, and he has to figure out how to basically clear himself of this murder to show that it was not him. And also, while this art deal is happening, and over the course of this movie, Fletch has to figure out, how exactly did this murder happen? How come all the evidence seems to point to him, while also making sure that this art deal goes through so that his girlfriend's father manages to stay alive during the whole situation. And all this has to get resolved over the course of this new film, Confess Fletch. But overall, guys, I really enjoyed the very first Fletch movie. It's definitely a film that I actually kind of think is probably one of my favorite Chevy Chase films. I know a lot of people probably pick the very first National Lampoon's Vacation or Christmas Vacation. But for me personally, I think the very first Fletch film is probably my favorite of the Chevy Chase films. I think he gives probably one of the funniest performances he's ever given in a movie. The mystery resolving around that first movie um, is very interesting. I like the idea of Fletch trying to figure out why somebody wants to pay him to murder him. Fletch Lives, unfortunately, was not a great sequel. Um, though Chevy Chase is good in it, though he brought all the stuff that he managed to do very well in the first Fletch movie, Fletch Lives was just not a good movie. I can kind of see why that kind of killed the franchise for a long time and why a third film never really got off the ground the way it did. But thankfully, we do have a third film finally after all these years of development hell. I know Jason Sudeikis and Jason Lee, and I think even Zach Braff at one point was considered to play Irwin Fletcher at one point. But all those scripts got scrapped, and now we're here with Confess Fletch with Jon Hamm. And I gotta say, I really, really like this movie. Though it's not as quite as good as that first Fletch movie, I think that'll probably always be everybody's favorite Fletch story, and it's probably the most interesting concept of all the Fletch stories, as far as I'm aware of. But this new movie is very good. I think this has a very good, solid story. Um, there was, I guess, a different story at one point considered for a third Fletch movie. But I think the story they chose here was pretty good. Like I said, not quite as good as the first Fletch story, but there's a lot of things about this movie that I really admire. So let's go over some positives and negatives of why I really like this new Fletch movie. First and foremost, Jon Hamm as Irwin Fletcher, I thought was great casting. I actually wasn't sure about the casting at first because most of the things I've seen Jon Hamm in, he plays a very serious role. He kind of always plays characters that you're not necessarily supposed to like necessarily. So it's just one of those things where when I heard he was cast as Irwin Fletcher, I wasn't really quite sure what to think of it. I do know he had some comedy background, like with Bridesmaids and some other things, but um, because he always plays the serious characters, I just wasn't sure how to react to his casting of Irwin Fletcher. But now that I've seen it in practice, now that I've seen it in an actual full length movie, he really was very quite good. If they make a sequel with this version of Irwin Fletcher played by Jon Hamm, I'm totally okay with that. I thought what he brings to Fletch, I thought was very funny. He does a lot of the things that Chevy Chase once did as the character. He kind of doesn't do the disguise thing as much as Chevy Chase did. Chevy Chase basically, when he was in a disguise, he basically went full SNL, um, completely different character, comedy sketch kind of a deal. Um, Jon Hamm doesn't really go that route. He does play different. He does pretend to be different people throughout the movie, like what Irwin Fletcher would normally do. But he does have more of kind of a. If you find him on the street, that's kind of how you're going to find Irwin Fletcher. Like maybe it's just a pair of glasses he wears, or maybe the shirt's different. Maybe just the name is different. Something really basic like that. But that's the way he played him. Just the way he kind of went into a room and became certain characters once again, like with the way Chevy Chase did, I thought was a lot of fun. So if they do make another Fletch film, if they do go ahead with another film with Jon Hamm as the character, I'm totally okay with that. Like I said, I thought he was a very good Irwin Fletcher in this movie. I also thought the comedy and the mystery elements of the film were a lot of fun. There's definitely a lot of whodunit here. There's definitely a lot of mystery, a lot of pieces where I didn't quite figure out the killer quite the way maybe people might with this movie. I definitely was guessing the entire runtime. But once they kind of reveal who the murderer is, it makes sense. And like I said, I thought the comedy was very effective in the film too. Not quite as comedic or as fun as, like I said, that first Fletch movie, but I did think the comedy and the mystery here were also both very effective. So for those who like that in the very first Fletch movie, I don't think you'll be disappointed here. This new Fletch film definitely brings the comedy and the mystery very well. And one thing I did like about the reboot that I wasn't expecting is, for the most part, they do continue forward from Fletch Lives. You can almost kind of watch Fletch Lives and immediately watch this one, and it'll feel like a continuation. Just because there is a lot of stuff that they acknowledge that's where Irwin Fletcher would be, specifically in modern day. They acknowledge kind of how Fletch feels about the digital age, which I'm going to get into here in a little bit. they they kind of showed the on and off relationship that Fletch has with his boss and how he wants to be an investigative journalist but kind of doesn't want to be that anymore because he did try to move on in Fletch Lives, and he's definitely trying to move on here with international travel and things like that. In a way, it does kind of feel like a soft continuation of the franchise, and I like that. I like that they didn't just remake Fletch or reboot it with a completely clean slate with completely starting fresh and new. There is some elements here that does feel like they are continuing off of those two earlier films, and I like that about the movie. I like that it does continue forward while also being new, while also, if you've never seen a Fletch film before, there's just enough context as to what Irwin Fletcher is and what he does and things like that. So I like how they continue the franchise forward. They did reboot it, but it was like a soft reboot, and once again, it was a soft continuation. So if you've never seen a Fletch film before, there is just enough context here where you don't have to necessarily see those two earlier films, but they continue it in such a way where it does feel like a soft continuation. And I like that about the movie. And like I said, I like how Fletch has a view on the digital era of journalism. I think it would make sense, specifically in the context of Irwin Fletcher, that investigative journalism got hurt really bad by the digital era. The fact that everybody can now be a journalist, everybody can now record stuff on a phone, everybody can take pictures on a phone, everybody can post a blog on a phone. And I think that's something you can tell that has bothered Fletch over the years, whether it's just Fletch in modern day or the way Fletch would have reacted to modern day back after when Fletch Lives came out. So I do like how the film acknowledges kind of how where Fletch feels about the whole thing, how he's still kind of doing what he once did, but he thinks there's things about the investigative journalism career that is kind of dead, and I can see why Irwin Fletcher would feel that way, and I like how the film acknowledges those things. And I do, like I said, I'd be totally fine with a sequel to this, and that's kind of tough to say. There's a lot of films out there where you're done watching them, you don't want a sequel, you don't want a continuation. I kind of want a continuation of this. I would love to see what more Jon Hamm can bring to the Irwin Fletcher character. So if they want a sequel, if the movie makes just enough money to get a sequel, I am totally down with it. I'm totally down with a continuation of the story. I also thought there was some fun side characters in this movie. There, Lorenza Izzo from House with a Clock in Its Walls plays Irwin Fletcher's girlfriend in the movie. There's two cop characters that seem to always follow Irwin Fletcher around in the movie. They think that he really kind of committed this murder. Both the lady and the man that play these two cops I thought were very good. There's kind of a running joke of the lady cop always getting a misdirect as to where Irwin Fletcher's going to go, and they kind of explain and show that in the movie why that's the case and why that's kind of funny. The male police officer has a newborn child at home that him and the wife have to trade places taking care of the kid with, and they even show scenes with him bringing his kid to the office and things like that. And there's just a lot of fun side characters. It's just one of those movies where nobody in the script feels wasted. Everybody kind of gets something to do in the movie, and every time someone or somebody shows up, you get excited about it because there's something that the script sets up for that character. By the time they show up, you know they have something fun to do. For my negatives of the movie, though, overall, I don't think this is as strong as the first Fletch movie. I think the first Fletch movie found the right rhythm with everything, with Irwin Fletcher having disguises, and there's just enough comedy, there's just enough mystery. There's even a little bit of action in that first Fletch movie, and I think that's something I really admire about it. Is it really was kind of a little bit of everything in that first Fletch movie. So it's not quite as strong as the first film, but this is a good, solid continuation of the franchise. And like I said, I really do hope they make a sequel to this because this was a fun movie to watch. And I can only imagine what more they would have for sequels if they decide to go through with that. But for the most part, too, I thought this film really could have needed more comedic elements. There's a lot of times where the comedy feels very laid back in the movie. And the first Fletch movie is very outrageous, very out there. And I never really got that impression with this movie. This film felt very laid back, which I'm fine with. Like, you know, they're going to reboot Fletch, so they got to do something different with it. But I really feel like the film could have benefited from more comedic elements. There's just a lot of times here where the comedy is just not rolling on the floor laughing enough. And so if they do go ahead with another Fletch movie, hopefully they can find a way to evolve the comedy a little bit, because I think the film would have benefited from that. And overall, I think the film does overstay its welcome by about 10 minutes in this movie. It's a very short film, but I think about an hour and 28 minutes would have been the perfect length for a movie like this. It runs about an hour and 38 minutes. It does kind of overstay its welcome. It does a lot of things to wrap itself up that don't really feel very necessary, because the mystery itself is already dissolved by the time the third act happens. So by the time the third act happens, it's just kind of resolution for everything, and it just kind of felt like it was going through the motions. For me personally, I thought the film would have benefited from 10 minutes shorter of a runtime. And the film introduces the idea of international elements for the Fletch franchise, and I like that. They only really use it for the setup, though. We really only see Irwin Fletcher outside of the country in the setup. And once the story is set up, it's mostly in the U.S. again. So if they do decide to go ahead with another Fletch movie, hopefully there is more international elements, because I liked what they did with it. Unfortunately, they just don't do a lot with that. But overall, I'm going to give Confess Fletch 8.5 out of 10. I really like this movie. I really do hope for a sequel. Please and thank you. Please, please, please. 8.5 out of 10 for me. I really like it. And for those who like the Fletch franchise, I think you're going to be very happy with this. I certainly was. Be sure to check out Confess Fletch, specifically if you like the first two Fletch movies.